So over the first 22 years in the history of the Grammy Awards, back when they mattered, no single artist had swept the so-called Big Four. Song of the Year, Record of the Year, Album of the Year, and Best New Artist of the Year. That was until 1981. The artists that made history did so while competing against some of music's heaviest hitters. Not only at that time, but of all time. Barbra Streisand, Frank Sinatra, Barry Gibb, Lionel Richie, Billy Joel, and Pink Floyd. We reveal whom that Grand Slam winner was and discover how the canvas can do miracles for the soul in a song that helped create a genre that wouldn't be defined until 30 years into the future. Stories coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. If you remember that dreadful feeling that you had when your Walkman battery started to die, you're going to dig this channel of music nostalgia, stories straight from the legends. Make sure that you subscribe below right now. Click the bell so that you're always in the know of our latest interviews and content. Also, check us out on Patreon. That's a way to support us and keep the music alive. So the evening of February 25th, 1981 was an unforgettable night at the Grammy Awards inside Radio City Music Hall in New York City. The night didn't belong to Barbra Streisand, though, nor Frank Sinatra or Barry Gibb or Lionel Richie or Billy Joel or even Pink Floyd. Instead, it belonged to a young man from San Antonio, Texas named Christopher Charles Gephardt, or better known by his stage name, Christopher Cross.
Sailing, Christopher Cross, songwriter. Congratulations.
On that very night, Christopher Cross swept the big four categories of the Grammys when he won for Song of the Year, Record of the Year, Album of the Year, and Best New Artist. In the first 22 years of the Grammy Awards, no artist had walked away with those big four awards. Even more incredible than the sweep itself is that it was achieved by an artist that was a virtual unknown 14 months before that historic night. So the song that won both Song of the Year and Record of the Year for Christopher Cross, it was his magnificent, unblemished Escape, a song simply called Sailing. Christopher's inspiration for composing this Yacht Rock masterpiece came from his high school friend Al Glasscock. He was a few years older than Christopher Cross. Glasscock acted as a surrogate big brother for Christopher, I guess. He was also a fellow guitarist. So the two buddies shared a mutual love for music. Now, Glasscock used to take Christopher out sailing on his small sunfish sailboat out on Canyon Lake, just northeast of San Antonio. The liberating excursions on Canyon Lake were deeply important to Christopher Cross. Sailing with Al was a way for Christopher to break away from what he called the trials and tribulations of being a teenager and the perils of growing up with an alcoholic father. As he says in the song, when the wind was right, he could sail away. He could leave his troubles on the shore beyond him, and he could find tranquility. Flashback to the mid-'70s, Christopher Cross was sitting alone at a table in his cheap apartment when the first verse and the chorus suddenly just fell out of him. He quoted Joni Mitchell when he described how this happened. As Joni said, these tunings put you in sort of a trance. In that trance, the lyrics came out in one steady stream of consciousness. When he came out of his so-called trance, I guess he paced around the room, repeating out loud the words that he'd just come up with. Wow, he thought to himself, that's really cool. I have the makings of a song here. About 2 years after his trance-like flash of inspiration, Christopher actually created the bridge to Sailing. The bridge was vital to the song's uplifting spirit. The key changes in the bridge ultimately projected the imagery that Christopher Cross imagined that would make the song something really special. Before Christopher Cross's prodigious debut LP, that shook the record business from its foundations, the musician bounced around clubs in Austin, Texas, just trying to make a name for himself. His peers knew him as a pretty damn good guitarist, which is something that Christopher Cross doesn't really get enough recognition for. He has just currently. There are two early career highlights that best demonstrated Christopher's prowess as an axeman. They're really interesting. Very cool story here. Christopher and his four-piece band at the time, it was named Flash, they once opened for Led Zeppelin. And for one concert, he stood in for the great Ritchie Blackmore to play lead guitar for a Deep Purple concert in San Antonio. The promoter of the show warned the members of Deep Purple to get their flu shots. And Blackmore actually had a bad reaction to the shot. Some people do. And he became so sick, he was unable to perform. Now, it was a sold-out show, and the promoter did not want to cancel it. So I guess the promoter talked Deep Purple keyboardist John Lord into doing it, and he recommended that the band use a local kid who could really play to fill in for Ritchie Blackmore, and so the band could do the show as planned. So Lord went backstage and discussed a solution for the predicament with his bandmates. Lead singer Ian Gillan, he wasn't down with it, but the other members overrode Gillan, and Deep Purple went on stage with a wide-eyed Chris Gephardt. It was definitely a dream come true moment for the musician, for any musician, really. And of course, he would later change his name to Christopher Cross. You can definitely hear Christopher's skilled guitar work on many of his solo works, including that outro on his number 2 smash Ride Like the Wind. I'm so happy that Christopher Cross is being recognized for that solo and his prowess for playing so many years later. It's about time. So as we continue to break down this song, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the glasses that I always wear on this program. Right now, you can get Zenni's latest frames and add their newest feature, Blocks Plus. They're new lenses that help you fight fatigue and eye strain, from staring at our blue screens every day. Zenni Blocks Plus and Blocks Plus Fatigue, they give you actually 12 times more protection from digital blue light. You can get them for 80% off regular retail prices when you order. Click the info button up here or down below to get a POR deal. So Chris Gephardt knew what he wanted. He wanted to break through as a solo artist and showcase his music. So he began to pitch demos of his songs to record labels. And this one included Ride Like the Wind and Sailing. Cross fought through rejection after rejection after rejection. He'd get the usual form letters, that read, "You have a good singing voice, but your songs aren't strong enough for us to consider signing you at this time." One label in particular showed some interest. It was Warner Brothers Records, home to some of Christopher Cross's favorite artists like Neil Young and Todd Rundgren, Van Morrison, Gordon Lightfoot, and James Taylor. So WB execs initially didn't hear Sailing or Ride Like the Wind as being potential hits. They actually preferred the Boz Scaggs fashion Say You'll Be Mine over the other two because it had a more conventional song structure, I guess, leading with the chorus, Say You'll Be Mine. That ended up as the 4th and final single from Christopher's debut record. But it wasn't a future record of the year. Say you'll be mine. Say you'll be mine. During a weekly A&R meeting at WB in Burbank, California, staff producer Michael Omartian, he championed the Christopher Cross demo. Michael Omartian's passion for these songs, they really perplexed the other big shots in this room. I mean, after all, Warner Brothers had their sights set on a new decade. They were focused on new wave and punk rock, acts that represented the hot music trends, so they thought. Omartian's bosses, they shook their heads and said, "Okay, Michael, go ahead and sign this Cross kid and produce his album, but it's your funeral." Omartian was an accomplished session player, producer, arranger, and he collaborated with many, including the meticulous Steely Dan duo Fagen and Becker. I mean, he knew how to craft a technically perfect record from working with those guys. Similar to making a Steely Dan record, recording Christopher Cross's brilliant debut album, it was challenging. Sometimes it was tense. Omartian claimed to have spent over, 700 hours in the studio with Christopher's band, just rehearsing songs. There was also a progression of guest stars, people like Don Henley and Larry Carlton and Jay Graydon and the soon-to-be ubiquitous Michael McDonald.
Save ourselves from all of the pain. Yes, we will save ourselves. Such a long way to make it to the border of Mexico.
Besides his invaluable direction as a producer, Omartian performed the breathtaking piano solo in that pivotal instrumental bridge section of Sailing. Sailing has a very unique arrangement, beginning with the orchestral intro of ascending and descending scale. It floats us into the dreamlike serenity of an open sea. I actually chose this background for this particular song because it matches just that feeling. Christopher Cross wrote 2 verses before that glorious chorus drifts into an even deeper rhapsody.
Sailing takes me away.
It's impossible not to get caught up in the reverie of Sailing. The lyric in the track always gives me chills, especially the part of the end of the verse 1 where Christopher sings in a calm, rising tenor. The canvas can do miracles, just you wait and see. Believe me.
Just you wait and see.
It's not far to Never Never Land, no reason to pretend. And if the wind is right, you can find the joy of innocence again. Just jukebox poetry.
It's not far to Never Never Land.
The distinctive tenor of Christopher Cross is another tranquilizing quality of Sailing. The song is so perfectly crafted for Christopher's solitary tonality.
It's right, you can find the joy of innocence again.
I've always believed that was a huge part of the charming solace of Christopher Cross's music. The comforting sincerity of his vocal. And virtually every song that he sings, every word he sings in Sailing is a soothing symphony.
Every word is a symphony, won't you believe?
Christopher wanted to make a record that rivaled the artistic excellence of a Steely Dan album. It's a tall order. His desire to make a perfect record, along with his obsessive-compulsive disorder, that made him come off as overly demanding to Omartian at times. But the producer, he believed in Christopher's vision, and the two ended up creating a deeply gratifying achievement on record. Christopher Cross's prodigious debut LP is widely held as a soft rock classic. It's one of the first digitally recorded albums that incorporated the 3M digital recording system, which was one of the reasons that the record sounded so good. Omartian's career is full of amazing accomplishments. He's earned 11 Grammy nominations and he's won 3 times. Remarkably, Omartian produced #1 records in 3 decades, of the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. He was nominated for Producer of the Year in 1980, 1984, and 1986 during some of the most competitive times in the history of the rock era. He also lent his talent on the ivory to play keyboard for arguably the most impactful #1 hit of the 80s, We Are the World by the USA for Africa supergroup. It's a song he co-produced with Quincy Jones. Returning to that incredible night at the Grammys for Christopher Cross in 1981, his sweep of the Big Four awards, it was stunning. Winning the Big Four, that was a feat that didn't happen again until Norah Jones did it in 2003. And 17 years later, in 2020, it was repeated by Billie Eilish. Nobody inside Radio City Music Hall was more flabbergasted when the presenter announced his name than Christopher himself.
Sailing was really never supposed to be released as a single, but I gotta say I'm really glad it was. And
Sailing, it was named Song of the Year and Record of the Year. His self-titled LP won Album of the Year and Christopher nabbed the Best New Artist Award category. He won a 5th Grammy, actually, for Best Arrangement, also for Sailing. So get this, after his domination of the Grammys, in February of 1981, Christopher Cross, he wasn't finished with his laurels. He did it again just a few weeks later. He took home the Oscar for Best Original Song for Arthur's theme, Best That You Can Do, of course from the movie Arthur, starring Dudley Moore.
When you get lost between the moon and New York City.
But would be really a few weeks of just walking on air as the most celebrated and awarded musician of that time. The underdog rookie who delivered one of the best records of 1980. Christopher's follow-up to his phenomenal premiere was Another Page. That was released in 83. That featured the number 12 single, All Right.
All right, think we're gonna make it. Think it might.
The second single was No Time for Talk. That peaked at number 33 on the pop chart. And it was another number one at the AC charts for Christopher Cross.
Love you more. There's no time for talk.
Christopher Cross's last big hit was Think of Laura. That moved to number 9. When interest in the song grew because of its prominence on popular soap opera General Hospital, it was put out as a single.
When you think of Laura, left.
The song was adopted as the theme song for the Laura character, of course played by Jeannie Francis, the big 80s couple. This was during the pop culture fervor of the Luke and Laura era of General Hospital. Now, actually, ABC did not ask for Cross's permission to play the song and never paid him for using it. You should think about that now. That's insane.
Left, don't cry, I know she wanted.
Christopher Cross's songs faded off radio after Think of Laura, but his unique voice was still around, even if you didn't realize it. Christopher joined Beach Boy Carl Wilson to sing background vocals on David Lee Roth's rendition of California Girls that came out in 85. And he sang supporting vocals for another Beach Boy, Brian Wilson's song Nighttime on Brian's debut solo album. Christopher Cross's explosive rise and all those awards that he won had a dark side. For many years after, Christopher was bitter about his steep decline after his sophomore release. His resentment of the fleeting aspect of fame that overwhelmed him to the point where he banished his awards in a box tucked away in his garage. Fortunately, Christopher shook off that bitterness and found a renewed appreciation for his record-setting accomplishments. I mean, you think about it, very few artists have done what he's done. And, he's grateful for his time in the limelight. Even if that light dimmed, as quickly as it illuminated. As we all know, the music business, it's a fickle pastime. But Christopher Cross, he created a masterpiece that years later, it still moves the soul. And outside of maybe What a Fool Believes and This Is It, it's the defining track of the celebrated genre we all know as yacht rock.
The wise man has the power. Stand up and fight. This is it.
A genre that was made up about 30 plus years after these songs were, at the top of the charts. Sailing is probably the choice here because it fits the genre like a glove. Sailing has always been an all-time favorite of mine for various reasons. First of all, gosh, I haven't told this story probably ever. When I was a little boy, I think I was like 6, I had a Cocker Spaniel puppy named Annie that I loved. I adored this dog. This little puppy followed me everywhere. I mean, she was the sweetest dog, was always looking after me. I mean, if the neighborhood bully tried to make trouble, she was there. If I scraped my knee, climbing the tree, falling out, she was there. She greeted me when I'd get home from school. She was just always excited to see me. So one day when I was playing with my dad in the front yard, I think we were flying a kite, she climbed up on this wood pile and tried to jump over the fence. But her collar got caught on top of a pike on the fence and it cut off her air supply. My dad found her lifeless body just a few hours later. I was devastated. I was inconsolable. I mean, I cried for days. I couldn't sleep. It was my first loss. My parents had just bought Christopher Cross's self-titled album, and that beautiful song, Sailing, seemed to be the only thing that could bring me any sort of comfort. So my dad recorded the LP on a tape for me, and I played it over and over through the weeks that followed that. Its peaceful melody and Cross's mesmerizing tenor voice, it calmed me down. And I was able to make it through this tragedy. Even a decade later, when I was a teenager and dealing with anxiety, it was a go-to song for me. It still is. Since Another Page, Christopher Cross has stayed true to his craft, releasing 13 studio albums through 2017, including a Christmas album. In 2020, Christopher was performing in Mexico City when he contracted the COVID-19 virus. And soon after that, he was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, a nervous disorder that caused temporary paralysis to his face, also to his hands and legs. Really debilitating for a singer-guitarist, of course. He spent 3 weeks in the ICU and 5 months in a wheelchair, but he battled through his afflictions and was back playing shows by 2022. He had to postpone his 40th anniversary tour, but he's back at it. So going back to the friendship, that special friendship between Chris Geppert and Al Glasscock, they had a sweet reunion in 1995, courtesy of the Howard Stern Show.
Well, it's not far down to paradise, at least.
Howard reunited the two sailing buddies on his radio show 28 years after their last voyage on Canyon Lake. Following the reunion, Christopher gave Glasscock a copy of the certified platinum sales record that he earned for selling more than 5 million copies of Sailing. It was a fitting way to honor the inspiration that really created Christopher Cross's signature composition.
Can do miracles. Just you wait and see.
As the second single from Christopher Cross, Sailing breezed to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the summer of 1980. It also reigned at the top of the pop chart in Canada. Sailing is just one of those precious songs that deserves to be experienced without any distractions. Turn the world off around you and let the song take you to paradise. The tranquility of Christopher Cross's resonant voice, it provides a peace that few singers from that era can. As he expresses in the song, from the peril that I was able to trudge through when I was just 6 years old, facing loss for the very first time. The canvas really can do miracles. Just listen to the song and see. Believe me. Thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Christopher Cross and this perfect song from the early 80s. What do you think about Cross's record-breaking evening and this song? What are your memories of it? Share below. If you dig our content, take a second to subscribe below. That way you'll never miss out on our videos. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth.